Mysteries of Udolpho by Ann Radcliffe. Chapter 12. Reading and musical selections performed by Kara Dahl Russell. Quote, "Some power impart the spear and shield at which the wizard passions fly, by which the giant follies die." Unquote. Collins. Madame Cheron's house stood at a little distance from the city of Toulouse, and was surrounded by extensive gardens in which Emily, who had risen early, amused herself with wandering before breakfast. From a terrace that extended along the highest part of them was a wide view over Languedoc. On the distant horizon to the south she discovered the wild summits of the Pyrenees, and her fancy immediately painted the green pastures of Gascony at their feet. Her heart pointed her to peaceful home, to the neighborhood where Valancourt was, where St. Aubert had been, and her imagination, piercing the veil of distance, brought that home to her eyes in all its interesting and romantic beauty. She experienced an inexpressible pleasure in believing that she beheld the country around it, though no feature could be distinguished except the retiring chain of the Pyrenees, and, inattentive to the scene immediately before her and to the flight of time, she continued to lean on the window of a pavilion that terminated the terrace, with her eyes fixed on Gascony, and her mind occupied with the interesting ideas which the view of it awakened, till a servant came to tell her breakfast was ready. Her thoughts thus recalled to the surrounding objects, the straight walks, square parterres, and artificial fountains of the garden, could not fail, as she passed through it, to appear the worse, opposed to the negligent graces and natural beauties of the grounds of La Vallée, upon which her recollection had been so intensely employed. "Whither have you been rambling so early?" said Madame Cheron, as her niece entered the breakfast-room. "I don't approve of these solitary walks." And Emily was surprised when, having informed her aunt that she had been no further than the gardens, she understood these to be inclined in the reproof. "I desire you will not walk there again at so early an hour unattended," said Madame Cheron. "My gardens are very extensive, and a young woman who can make assignations by moonlight at La Vallée is not to be trusted in her own inclinations elsewhere." Emily, extremely surprised and shocked, had scarcely power to beg an explanation of these words, and when she did, her aunt absolutely refused to give it, though by her severe looks and half-sentences she appeared anxious to impress Emily with the belief that she was well informed of some degrading circumstances of her conduct. Conscious innocence could not prevent a blush from stealing over Emily's cheek. She trembled and looked confusedly under the bold eye of Madame Cheron, who blushed also, but hers was the blush of triumph, such as sometimes stains the countenance of a person congratulating himself on the penetration which had taught him to suspect another, and who loses both pity for the supposed criminal and indignation of his guilt in the gratification of his own vanity. Emily, not doubting that her aunt's mistake arose from having observed her ramble in the garden on the night preceding her departure from La Vallée, now mentioned the motive of it, at which Madame Cheron smiled contemptuously, refusing either to accept this explanation or to give her reasons for refusing it, and soon after she concluded the subject by saying, I never trust people's assertions. I always judge of them by their actions, and I am willing to try what will be your behavior in future. Emily, less surprised by her aunt's moderation and mysterious silence than by the accusation she had received, deeply considered the latter, and scarcely doubted that it was Valancourt whom she had seen at night in the gardens of La Vallée, and that he had been observed there by Madame Cheron, who, now passing from one painful topic only to revive another, almost equally so, spoke of the situation of her niece's property in the hands of Monsieur Motteville. While she thus talked with ostentatious pity of Emily's misfortunes, she failed not to inculcate the duties of humility and gratitude, or to render Emily fully sensible of every cruel mortification, who soon perceived that she was to be considered as a dependent, not only by her aunt, but by her aunt's servants. She was now informed that a large party were expected to dinner, on which account Madame Cheron repeated the lesson of the preceding night concerning her conduct in company, and Emily wishes that she might have courage enough to practice it. Her aunt then proceeded to examine the simplicity of her dress, adding that she expected to see her attired with gaiety and taste, after which she condescended to show Emily the splendor of her chateau, and to point out the particular beauty or elegance which she thought distinguished each of her numerous suites of apartments. She then withdrew to her toilette, the throne of her homage, and Emily to her chamber to unpack her books, and to try to charm her mind by reading till the hour of dressing. When the company arrived, Emily entered the saloon with an air of timidity, which all her efforts could not overcome, and which was increased by the consciousness of Madame Cheron's severe observation. Her morning dress, the mild dejection of her beautiful countenance, and the retiring diffidence of her manner, rendered her a very interesting object to many of the company, among whom she distinguished Signor Montoni and his friend Cavigni, the late visitors at Monsieur Quesnel's, who now seemed to converse with Madame Cheron with the familiarity of old acquaintance, and she to attend them with particular pleasure. This Signor Montoni had an air of conscious superiority, animated by spirit and strengthened by talents, to which every person seemed involuntarily to yield. The quickness of his perceptions was strikingly expressed on his countenance, yet that countenance could submit implicitly to occasion, and, more than once in this day, the triumph of art over nature might have been discerned in it. His visage was long and rather narrow, yet he was called handsome, and it was perhaps the spirit and vigour of his soul sparkling through his features that triumphed for him. Emily felt admiration, but not the admiration that leads to esteem, for it was mixed with a degree of fear, she knew not exactly wherefore. Cavigni was gay and insinuating as formerly, and, though he paid almost incessant attention to Madame Cheron, he found some opportunities of conversing with Emily, to whom he directed, at first, the sallies of his wit, but now and then assumed an air of tenderness which she observed, and shrunk from. Though she replied but little, the gentleness and sweetness of her manners encouraged him to talk, and she felt relieved when a young lady of the party, who spoke incessantly, obtruded herself on his notice. This lady, who possessed all the sprightliness of a Frenchwoman with all her coquetry, affected to understand every subject, or rather there was no affectation in the case, for, never looking beyond the limits of her own ignorance, she believed she had nothing to learn. She attracted notice from all, amused some, disgusted others for a moment, and was then forgotten. This day passed without any material occurrence, and Emily, though amused by the characters she had seen, was glad when she could retire to the recollections which had acquired with her the character of duties. A fortnight passed in a round of dissipation and company, and Emily, who attended Madame Cheron in all her visits, was sometimes entertained, but oftener wearied. She was struck by the apparent talents and knowledge displayed in the various conversations she listened to, and it was long before she discovered that the talents were, for the most part, those of imposture, and the knowledge nothing more than was necessary to assist them. But what deceived her most was the air of constant gaiety and good spirits displayed by every visitor, and which she supposed to arise from content as constant and from benevolence as ready. At length, from the overacting of some less accomplished than the others, she could perceive that, though contentment and benevolence are the only sure sources of cheerfulness, the immoderate and feverish animation usually exhibited in large parties results partly from an insensibility to the cares, which benevolence must sometimes derive from the sufferings of others, and partly from a desire to display the appearance of that prosperity which they know will command submission and attention to themselves. Emily's pleasantest hours were passed in the pavilion of the terrace to which she retired, when she could steal from observation with a book to overcome or a lute to indulge her melancholy. There, as she sat with her eyes fixed on the far distant Pyrenees, and her thoughts on Valancourt and the beloved scenes of Gascony, she would play the sweet and melancholy songs of her native province, the popular songs she had listened to from her childhood. One evening, having excused herself from accompanying her aunt abroad, she thus withdrew to the pavilion with books and her lute. It was the mild and beautiful evening of a sultry day, and the windows, which fronted the west, opened upon the glory of a setting sun. Its rays illuminated with strong splendor the cliffs of the Pyrenees, and touched their snowy tops with a roseate hue that remained long after the sun had sunk below the horizon, and the shades of twilight had stolen over the landscape. Emily touched her lute with that fine, melancholy expression which came from her heart. The pensive hour and the scene, the evening light of the Garonne that flowed at no great distance, and whose waves, as they passed towards La Vallée, she often viewed with a sigh. These united circumstances disposed her mind to tenderness, and her thoughts were with Valancourt, of whom she had heard nothing since her arrival at Toulouse, and now that she was removed from him and in uncertainty, she perceived all the interest he held in her heart. Before she saw Valancourt, she had never met a mind and a taste so accordant with her own, and though Madame Cheron told her much of the arts of dissimulation, and that the elegance and propriety of thought which she so much admired in her lover were assumed for the purpose of pleasing her, she could scarcely doubt their truth. This possibility, however, faint as it was sufficient to harass her mind with anxiety, and she found that few conditions are more painful than that of uncertainty as to the merit of a beloved object, an uncertainty which she would not have suffered had her confidence in her own opinions been greater. She was awakened from her musing by the sound of horses' feet along a road that wound under the windows of the pavilion, and a gentleman passed on horseback, whose resemblance to Valancourt in air and figure, for the twilight did not permit a view of his features, immediately struck her. She retired hastily from the lattice, fearing to be seen, yet wishing to observe further, while the stranger passed on without looking up, and, when she returned to the lattice, she saw him faintly through the twilight, winding under the high trees that led to Toulouse. This little incident so much disturbed her spirits that the temple and its scenery were no longer interesting to her, and, after walking a while on the terrace, she returned to the chateau. Madame Cheron, whether she had seen a rival admired, had lost at play, or had witnessed an entertainment more splendid than her own, was returned from a visit with a temper more than usually discomposed, and Emily was glad when the hour arrived in which she could retire to the solitude of her own apartment. On the following morning she was summoned to Madame Cheron, whose countenance was inflamed with resentment, and as Emily advanced, she held out a letter to her. "Do you know this hand?" said she in a severe tone, and with a look that was intended to search her heart, while Emily examined the letter attentively, and assured her that she did not. "Do not provoke me," said her aunt. "You do know it. Confess the truth immediately. I insist upon your confessing the truth instantly." Emily was silent and turned to leave the room, but Madame called her back. "Oh, you are guilty then," said she. "You do know this hand." "If you were before in doubt of this, Madame," replied Emily calmly, "why did you accuse me of having told a falsehood?" Madame Cheron did not blush, but her niece did, a moment after, when she heard the name of Valancourt. It was not, however, with the consciousness of deserving reproof, for, if she ever had seen his handwriting, the present characters did not bring it to her recollection. "It is useless to deny it," said Madame Cheron. "I see in your countenance that you are no stranger to this letter, and I dare say you have received many such from this impertinent young man without my knowledge in my own house." Emily, shocked at the indelicacy of this accusation, still more than by the vulgarity of the former, instantly forgot the pride that had imposed silence, and endeavoured to vindicate herself from the aspersion, but Madame Cheron was not to be convinced. "I cannot suppose," she resumed, "that this young man would have taken the liberty of writing to me if you had not encouraged him to do so, and I must now." "You will allow me to remind you, madame," said Emily timidly, "of some particulars of a conversation we had at La Vallée. I then told you truly that I had only not forbade Monsieur Valancourt from addressing my family." "I will not be interrupted," said Madame Cheron, interrupting her niece. "I was going to say, I have forgot what I was going to say. But how happened it that you did not forbid him?" Emily was silent. "How happened it that you encouraged him to trouble me with his letter, a young man that nobody knows, an utter stranger in this place, a young adventurer, no doubt, who is looking for good fortune? However, on that point, he has mistaken his aim." "His family was known to my father," said Emily modestly, and without appearing to be sensible of the last sentence. "Oh, that is no recommendation at all," replied her aunt, with the usual readiness on this topic. "He took such strange fancies to people. He was always judging persons by their countenances, and was continually deceived." "Yet it was but now, madame, that you judged me guilty by my countenance," said Emily, with the design of reproving Madame Cheron, to which she was induced by this disrespectful mention of her father. "I called you here," resumed her aunt, colouring, "to tell you that I will not be disturbed in my own house by any letters or visits from young men who may take a fancy to flatter you. This Monsieur de Valentine, I think you call him, has the impertinence to beg I will permit him to pay his respects to me. Oh, I shall send him a proper answer, and for you, Emily, I repeat it once for all, if you are not contented to conform to my directions and to my way of life, I shall give up the task of overlooking your conduct. I shall no longer trouble myself with your education, but shall send you to board in a convent." "Dear madam," said Emily, bursting into tears, and overcome by the rude suspicions her aunt had expressed, "how have I deserved these reproofs?" She could say no more, and so very fearful was she of acting with any degree of impropriety in the affair itself, that, at the present moment, Madame Cheron might perhaps have prevailed with her to bind herself by a promise to renounce Valancourt for ever. Her mind, weakened by her terrors, could no longer suffer her to view him as she had formerly done. She feared the error of her own judgment, not that of Madame Cheron, and feared also that, in her former conversation with him at La Vallée, she had not conducted herself with sufficient reserve. She knew that she did not deserve the coarse suspicions which her aunt had thrown out, but 1,000 scruples rose to torment her, such as never would have disturbed the peace of Madame Cheron. Thus rendered anxious to avoid every opportunity of erring, and willing to submit to any restrictions that her aunt should think proper, she expressed an obedience to which Madame Cheron did not give much confidence, and which she seemed to consider as the consequence of either fear or artifice. "Well, then," said she, "promise me that you will neither see this young man nor write to him without my consent." "Dear madam," replied Emily, "can you suppose I would do either unknown to you?" "I don't know what to suppose. There is no knowing how young women will act. It is difficult to place any confidence in them, for they have seldom sense enough to wish for the respect of the world." "Alas, madame," said Emily, "I am anxious for my own respect. My father taught me the value of that. He said if I deserved my own esteem, that the world would follow, of course."
"My brother was a good kind of man," replied Madame Cheron, "but he did not know the world. I am sure I have always felt a proper respect for myself, yet—"
She stopped, but she might have added that the world had not always shown respect to her, and this without impeaching its judgment.
"Well, resumed Madame Cheron, "you have not given me the promise, though, that I I demand."
Emily readily gave it, and being then suffered to withdraw, she walked in the garden, tried to compose her spirits, and at length arrived at her favourite pavilion at the end of the terrace, where, seating herself at one of the embowered windows that opened upon a balcony, the stillness and seclusion of the scene allowed her to recollect her thoughts and to arrange them so as to form a clearer judgment of her former conduct. She endeavoured to review with exactness all the particulars of her conversation with Valancourt at La Vallée, had the satisfaction to observe nothing that could alarm her delicate pride, and thus to be confirmed in the self-esteem which was so necessary to her peace. Her mind then became tranquil, and she saw Valancourt amiable and intelligent as he had formerly appeared, and Madame Cheron neither the one nor the other. The remembrance of her lover, however, brought with it many very painful emotions, for it by no means reconciled her to the thought of resigning him, and Madame Cheron having already shown how highly she disapproved of the attachment, she foresaw such suffering from the opposition of interests. Yet with all this was mingled a degree of delight which, in spite of reason, partook of hope. She determined, however, that no consideration should induce her to permit a clandestine correspondence, and to observe in her conversation with Valancourt, should they ever meet again, the same nicety of reserve which had hitherto marked her conduct. As she repeated the words, "should we ever meet again," she shrunk as if this was a circumstance which had never before occurred to her, and tears came to her eyes, which she hastily dried, for she heard footsteps approaching, and then the door to the pavilion open, and on turning she saw Valancourt. An emotion of mingled pleasure, surprise, and apprehension pressed so suddenly upon her heart as almost to overcome her spirits. The colour left her cheeks, then returned brighter than before, and she was for a moment unable to speak or to rise from her chair. His countenance was the mirror in which she saw her own emotions reflected, and it roused her to self-command. The joy which had animated his features when he entered the pavilion was suddenly repressed as, approaching, he perceived her agitation, and, in a tremulous voice, inquired after her health. Recovered from her first surprise, she answered him with a tempered smile, but a variety of opposite emotions still assailed her heart, and struggled to subdue the mild dignity of her manner. It was difficult to tell which predominated, the joy of seeing Valancourt, or the terror of her aunt's displeasure when she should hear of this meeting. After some short and embarrassed conversation, she led him into the gardens, and inquired if he had seen Madame Cheron. "No," said he, "I have not seen her, for they told me she was engaged, and as soon as I learned that you were in the gardens, I came hither." He paused a moment in great agitation, and then added, "May I venture to tell you the purport of my visit, without incurring your displeasure, and to hope that you will not accuse me of precipitation in now availing myself of the permission you once gave me of addressing your family?" Emily, who knew not what to reply, was spared from further perplexity, and was sensible only of fear, when, on raising her eyes, she saw Madame Cheron turn into the avenue. As the consciousness of innocence returned, this fear was so far dissipated as to permit her to appear tranquil, and, instead of avoiding her aunt, she advanced with Valancourt to meet her. The look of haughty and impatient displeasure with which Madame Cheron regarded them made Emily shrink, who understood from a single glance that this meeting was believed to have been more than accidental. Having mentioned Valancourt's name, she became again too much agitated to remain with them, and returned to the chateau, where she awaited long, in a state of trembling anxiety, the conclusion of the conference. She knew not how to account for Valancourt's visit to her aunt before he had received the permission he solicited, since she was ignorant of a circumstance which would have rendered the request useless, even if Madame Cheron had been inclined to grant it. Valancourt, in the agitation of his spirits, had forgotten to date his letter, so that it was impossible for Madame Cheron to return an answer, and, when he recollected this circumstance, he was perhaps not so sorry for the omission as glad of the excuse it allowed him for waiting on her before she could send a refusal. Madame Cheron had a long conversation with Valancourt, and when she returned to the chateau, her countenance expressed ill humour, but not the degree of severity which Emily had apprehended.
"I have dismissed this young man at last," said she, "and I hope my house will never again be disturbed with similar visits. He assures me that your interview was not preconcerted."
"Dear madam," said Emily in extreme emotion, "you surely did not ask him the question."
"Most certainly I did. You could not suppose I should be so imprudent as to neglect it."
"Good God!" exclaimed Emily, "what an opinion must he form of me, since you, madame, could express a suspicion of such ill conduct?"
"Oh, it is of very little consequence what opinion he may form of you," replied her aunt, "for I have put an end to the affair. But I believe he will not form a worse opinion of me for my prudent conduct. I let him see that I was not to be trifled with, and that I had more delicacy than to permit any clandestine correspondence to be carried on in my house."
Emily had frequently heard Madame Cheron use the word delicacy, but she was now more than usually perplexed to understand how she meant to apply it in this instance, in which her whole conduct appeared to merit the very reverse of the term.
"It was very inconsiderate of my brother," resumed Madame Cheron, "to leave the trouble of overlooking your conduct to me. I wish you were well settled in life, but if I find that I am to be further troubled with such visitors as this Monsieur Valancourt, I shall place you in a convent at once, so remember the alternative. This young man has been impertinent to own to me. He owns it, that his fortune is very small, and that he is chiefly dependent on an elder brother, and on the profession he has chosen. He should have concealed these circumstances at least, if he expected to succeed with me. Had he the presumption to suppose I would marry my niece to a person such as he describes himself?
Emily dried her tears when she heard of the candid confession of Valancourt, and though the circumstances it discovered were afflicting to her hopes, his artless conduct gave her a degree of pleasure that overcame every other emotion. But she was compelled, even thus early in life, to observe that good sense and noble integrity are not always sufficient to cope with folly and narrow cunning, and her heart was pure enough to allow her, even at this trying moment, to look with more pride on the defeat of the former, than with mortification on the conquests of the latter.
Madame Cheron pursued her triumph. "He has also thought proper to tell me that he will receive his dismission from no person but yourself. This favour, however, I have absolutely refused him. He shall learn that it is quite sufficient that I disapprove him. And I take this opportunity of repeating that if you concert any means of interview unknown to me, you shall leave my house immediately."
"How little do you know me, madame, that you should think such an injunction necessary," said Emily, trying to suppress her emotion. "How little of the dear parents who educated me!" Madame Cheron now went to dress for an engagement which she had made for the evening, and Emily, who would gladly have been excused from attending her aunt, did not ask to remain at home, lest her request should be attributed to an improper motive. When she retired to her own room, the little fortitude which had supported her in the presence of her relation forsook her. She remembered only that Valancourt, whose character appeared more amiable from every circumstance that unfolded it, was banished from her presence, perhaps for ever, and she passed the time in weeping, which, according to her aunt's direction, she ought to have employed in dressing. This important duty was, however, quickly dispatched, though, when she joined Madame Cheron at a table, her eyes betrayed that she had been in tears, and drew upon her a severe reproof. Her efforts to appear cheerful did not entirely fail when she joined the company at the house of Madame Clerval, an elderly widow lady who had lately come to reside at Toulouse on an estate of her late husband. She had lived many years at Paris in a splendid style, had a naturally gay temper, and, since her residence at Toulouse, had given some of the most magnificent entertainments that had ever been seen in that neighbourhood. These excited not only the envy, but the trifling ambition of Madame Cheron, who, since she could not rival the splendour of her festivities, was desirous of being ranked in the number of her most intimate friends. For this purpose she paid her the most obsequious attention, and made a point of being disengaged whenever she received an invitation from Madame Clerval, of whom she talked wherever she went, and derived much self-consequence from impressing a belief on her general acquaintance that they were on the most familiar footing. The entertainments of this evening consisted of a ball and supper. It was a fancy ball, and the company danced in groups in the gardens, which were very extensive. The high and luxuriant trees under which the groups assembled were illuminated with a profusion of lamps disposed with taste and fancy. The gay and various dresses of the company, some of whom were seated on the turf, conversing at their ease, observing the cotillons, making refreshments, and sometimes touching supportively a guitar, the gallant manners of the gentlemen, the exquisitely capricious air of the ladies, the light fantastic steps of their dancers, the musicians with the lute, the hautbois, and the tabor, seated at the foot of an elm, and the sylvan scenery of the woods around were circumstances that unitedly formed a characteristic and striking picture of a French festivity. Emily surveyed the gaiety of the scene with a melancholy kind of pleasure, and her emotion may be imagined when, as she stood with her aunt, looking at one of the groups, she perceived Valancourt, saw him dancing with a young and beautiful lady, saw him conversing with her with a mixture of attention and familiarity, such as she had seldom observed in his manner. She turned hastily from the scene, and attempted to draw away Madame Cheron, who was conversing with Signor Cavigni, and neither perceived Valancourt, nor was willing to be interrupted. A faintness suddenly came over Emily, and, unable to support herself, she sat down on a turf bank beneath the trees, where several other persons were seated. One of these, observing the extreme paleness of her countenance, inquired if she was ill, and begged she would allow him to fetch her a glass of water, for which politeness she thanked him, but did not accept it. Her apprehension lest Valancourt should observe her emotion made her anxious to overcome it, and she succeeded so far as to recompose her countenance. Madame Cheron was still conversing with Cavigni, and the Count Beauvier, who had addressed Emily, made some observations upon the scene, to which she answered almost unconsciously, for her mind was still occupied with the idea of Valancourt, to whom it was with extreme uneasiness that she remained so near. Some remarks, however, which the Count made upon the dance obliged her to turn her eyes towards it, and at that moment Valancourt's met hers. Her colour faded again. She felt that she was relapsing into faintness, and instantly averted her looks, but not before she had observed the altered countenance of Valancourt on perceiving her. She would have left the spot immediately, had she not been conscious that this conduct would have shown him more obviously the interest he held in her heart, and, having tried to attend to the Count's conversation and to join in it, she at length recovered her spirits. But when he made some observation on Valancourt's partner, the fear of showing that she was interested in the remark would have betrayed it to him, had not the Count, while he spoke, looked towards the person of whom he was speaking. "The lady," said he, "dancing with that young chevalier, who appears to be accomplished in everything but in dancing, is ranked among the beauties of Toulouse. She is handsome, and her fortune will be very large. I hope she will make a better choice in a partner for life than she has done in a partner for the dance, for I observe he has just put the set into great confusion. He does nothing but commit blunders. I am surprised that with his air and figure he has not taken more care to accomplish himself in dancing." Emily, whose heart trembled at every word that was now uttered, endeavoured to turn the conversation from Valancourt by inquiring the name of the lady with whom he danced, but before the Count could reply the dance concluded, and Emily, perceiving that Valancourt was coming towards her, rose and joined Madame Cheron. "Here is the Chevalier Valancourt, madame," she said in a whisper. "Pray let us go." Her aunt immediately moved on, but not before Valancourt had reached them, who bowed lowly to Madame Cheron, and with an earnest and dejected look to Emily, with whom, notwithstanding all her effort, an air of more than common reserve prevailed. The presence of Madame Cheron prevented Valancourt from remaining, and he passed on with a countenance whose melancholy reproached her for having increased it. Emily was called from the musing fit into which she had fallen by the Count Beauvilliers, who was known to her aunt. "I have to beg your pardon, mademoiselle," said he, "for a rudeness which you will readily believe was quite unintentional. I did not know that the Chevalier was your acquaintance when I so freely criticised his dancing." Emily blushed and smiled, and Madame Cheron spared her the difficulty of replying. "If you mean the person who has just passed us," said she, "I can assure you he is no acquaintance of either mine or Mademoiselle St. Aubert's. I know nothing of him." "Oh, that is the Chevalier Valancourt," said Cavigni carelessly, and looking back. "Oh, you know him then?" said Madame Cheron. "I am not acquainted with him," replied Cavigni. "You don't know, then, the reason I have to call him impertinent? He has had the presumption to admire my niece." "If every man deserves the title of impertinent who admires Mademoiselle St. Aubert," replied Cavigni, "I fear there are a great many impertinences, and I am willing to acknowledge myself one of the number." Oh, Signor," said Madame Cheron with an affected smile, "I perceive you have learned the art of complimenting since you came into France. But it is cruel to compliment children, since they mistake flattery for truth." Cavigni turned away his face for a moment, and then said with a studied air, "Whom then are we to compliment, madame? For it would be absurd to compliment a woman of refined understanding. She is above all praise." As he finished the sentence he gave Emily a sly look, and the smile that had lurked in his eyes stole forth. She perfectly understood it, and blushed for Madame Cheron, who replied, "You are perfectly right, Signor. No woman of understanding can endure compliment." "I have heard Signor Montoni say," rejoined Cavigni, "that he never knew but one woman who deserved it." "Well," exclaimed Madame Cheron, with a short laugh and a smile of unutterable complacency, "and who could she be?" "Aha!" replied Cavigni,
It is impossible to mistake her, for certainly there is not more than one woman in the world who has both the merit to deserve compliment and the wit to refuse it. Most women reverse the case entirely." He looked again at Emily, who blushed deeper than before for her aunt, and turned from him with displeasure.
"Well, Signor, I protest you are a Frenchman. I never heard a foreigner say anything half so gallant as that."
"True, madame," said the Count, who had been some time silent, and with a low bow. "But the gallantry of the compliment had been utterly lost but for the ingenuity that discovered the application." Madame Cheron did not perceive the meaning of this too satirical sentence, and she therefore escaped the pain which Emily felt on her account.
"Oh, here comes Signor Montoni himself," said her aunt. "I protest I will tell him all the fine things you have been saying to me."
The Signor, however, passed at this moment into another walk.
"Oh, pray, who is it that has so much engaged your friend this evening?"
asked Madame Cheron with an air of chagrin.
"I have not seen him once."
"He had a very particular engagement with the Marquis La Riviere," replied Cavigny, "which has detained him, I perceive, till this moment, or he would have done himself the honor of paying respects to you, madame, sooner, as he commissioned me to say. But I know not how it is. Your conversation is so fascinating. It can charm even memory, I think, or I should certainly have delivered my friend's apology before."
"Oh, the apology, sir, would have been more satisfactory from himself,"
said Madame Cheron, whose vanity was more mortified by Montoni's neglect than flattered by Cavigny's compliment. Her manner at this moment, and Cavigny's late conversation, now awakened a suspicion in Emily's mind, which, notwithstanding that some recollection served to confirm it, appeared preposterous. She thought she perceived that Montoni was paying serious addresses to her aunt, and that she not only accepted them, but was jealously watchful of any appearance of neglect on his part. That Madame Cheron, at her years, should elect a second husband was ridiculous, though her vanity made it not impossible, but that Montoni, with his discernment, his figure, and pretensions, should make a choice of Madame Cheron, appeared most wonderful. Her thoughts, however, did not dwell long on the subject. Nearer interests pressed upon them. Valancourt, rejected of her aunt, and Valancourt dancing with a gay and beautiful partner, alternately tormented her mind. As she passed along the gardens, she looked timidly forward, half fearing and half hoping that he might appear in the crowd, and the disappointment she felt on not seeing him told her that she had hoped more than she had feared. Montoni soon after joined the party. He muttered over some short speech of regret for having been so long detained elsewhere, when he knew he should have the pleasure of seeing Madame Cheron here, and she, receiving the apology with an air of a pettish girl, addressed herself entirely to Cavigny, who looked archly at Montoni, as if he would have said, "I shall not triumph over you too much. I will have the goodness to bear my honours meekly, but look sharp, Signor, or I shall certainly run away with your prize." The supper was served in indifferent pavilions in the garden, as well as in one large saloon of the chateau, and with more of taste than either of splendour or even of plenty. Madame Cheron and her party supped with Madame Clerval in the saloon, and Emily with difficulty disguised her emotion when she saw Valancourt placed at the same table with herself. There Madame Cheron, having surveyed him with high displeasure, said to some person who sat next to her, "Pray, who is that young man?" "It is the Chevalier Valancourt," was the answer.
"Yes, I am not ignorant of his name, but who is this Chevalier Valancourt that thus intrudes himself at this table?"
The attention of the person to whom she spoke was called off before she received a second reply. The table at which they sat was very long, and Valancourt being seated with his partner near the bottom and Emily near the top, the distance between them may account for his not immediately perceiving her. She avoided looking to that end of the table, but whenever her eyes happened to glance towards it, she observed him conversing with his beautiful companion, and the observation did not contribute to restore her peace, any more than the accounts she heard of the fortune and accomplishments of this same lady. Madame Cheron, to whom these remarks were sometimes addressed, because they supported topics for trivial conversation, seemed indefatigable in her attempts to depreciate Valancourt, towards whom she felt all the petty resentment of a narrow pride.
"I admire the lady," said she, "but I must condemn her choice of a partner."
"Oh, the Chevalier Valancourt is one of the most accomplished young men that we have," replied the lady, to whom this remark was addressed. "It is whispered that Mademoiselle d'Emery and her large fortune are to be his."
"Impossible!" exclaimed Madame Cheron, reddening with vexation. "It is impossible that she can be so destitute of taste. He has so little air of person and condition, that if I did not see him at the table of Madame Clairval, I should never have suspected him to be one. I have, besides, particular reasons for believing the report to be erroneous."
"I cannot doubt the truth of it," replied the lady gravely, disgusted by the abrupt contradiction she had received concerning her opinion of Valancourt's merit.
"You will perhaps doubt it," said Madame Cheron, "when I assure you that it was only this morning that I rejected his suit."
This was said without any intention of imposing the meaning it conveyed, but simply from a habit of considering herself to be the most important person in every affair that concerned her niece, and because literally she had rejected Valancourt. "Your reasons are indeed such as cannot be doubted," replied the lady with an ironical smile.
"Any more than the discernment of Chevalier Valancourt," added Cavigni, who stood by the chair of Madame Cheron, and had heard her arrogate to herself, as he thought, a distinction which had been paid to her niece.
"His discernment may be justly questioned, Signor,"
said Madame Cheron, who was not flattered by what she understood to be an encomium on Emily.
"Ah, alas!" exclaimed Cavigni, surveying Madame Cheron with affected ecstasy. "How vain is that assertion, while that face, that shape, that air continue to refute it! Unhappy Valancourt, but his discernment has been his destruction." Emily looked surprised and embarrassed. The lady who had lately spoken, astonished, and Madame Cheron, who, though she did not perfectly understand the speech, was very ready to believe herself complimented by it, and smilingly,
Oh, Signor, you are very gallant, but those who hear you vindicate the Chevalier's discernment will suppose that I am the object of it."
"They cannot doubt it," replied Cavigni, bowing low.
"And would that not be very mortifying, Signor?"
"Unquestionably it would not," said Cavigni.
"Oh, I cannot endure the thought," said Madame Cheron.
"It is not to be endured," replied Cavigni.
"What can be done to prevent so humiliating a mistake?" rejoined Madame Cheron.
"Alas, I cannot assist you," replied Cavigni, with a deliberating air. "Your only chance of refuting the calumny and of making people understand what you wish to believe is to persist in your first assertion, for when they are told of the Cavalier's want of discernment, it is possible they may suppose he never presumed to distress you with his admiration. But then again, that diffidence which renders you so insensible to your own perfections, they will consider this, and Valancourt's taste will not be doubted, though you arraign it. In short, they will, in spite of your endeavours, continue to believe what might very naturally have occurred to them without any hint of mine, that the Chevalier has taste enough
to admire a beautiful woman.
Oh, all of this is very distressing,
said Madame Cheron with a profound sigh.
May I be allowed to ask what is so distressing? Said Mademoiselle Clerval,
who was struck with the rueful countenance and doleful accent with which this was delivered.
Oh, it is a delicate subject, replied Madame Cheron, very mortifying to me.
I am concerned to hear it, said Madame Clerval.
I hope nothing has occurred this evening, particularly to distress you. Oh, alas, yes, within this half hour, and I know not where to report. It may end. My pride was never so shocked before, but I assure you the report is totally void of foundation.
Good God! exclaimed Madame Clerval.
What can be done? Can you point out any way by which I can assist or console you? The only way by which you can do either, replied Madame Cheron, is to contradict the report wherever you go.
Well, but pray inform me. What am I to contradict?
It is so very humiliating that I know not how to mention it, continued Madame Cheron, but you shall judge. Do you observe that young man seated near the bottom of the table who is conversing with Mademoiselle Desmarais?
Yes, I perceive whom you mean.
You observe how little he has of air of a person of condition. I was saying just now that I should not have thought him a gentleman if I had not seen him at your table.
Well, but the report, said Madame Clerval. Let me understand the subject of your distress.
Ah, the subject of my distress, replied Madame Cheron. This person whom nobody knows. Oh, I beg your pardon, madame. I did not consider what I said. This impertinent young man, having had the presumption to address my niece, has, I fear, given rise to report that he had declared himself my admirer. Now, only consider how very mortifying such a report must be. You know, I know, will feel for my situation, a woman of my condition. Think how degrading even the rumour of such an alliance must be.
Ah, degrading indeed, my poor friend, said Madame Clerval. You may rely upon it that I will contradict the report wherever I go. As she said which, she turned her attention upon another part of the company, and Cavigni, who had hitherto appeared a grave spectator of the scene, now fearing he should be unable to smother a laugh that convulsed him, walked abruptly away.
I perceive you do not know, said the lady who sat near Madame Cheron, that the gentleman you have been speaking of is Madame Clerval's nephew. Oh, impossible! exclaimed Madame Cheron, who now began to perceive that she had been totally mistaken in her judgment of Valancourt, and to praise him aloud with as much civility as she had before censured him with frivolous malignity. Emily, who during the greater part of this conversation had been so absorbed in thought as to be spared the pain of hearing it, was now extremely surprised by hearing her aunt's praise of Valancourt, with whose relationship to Madame Clerval she was unacquainted. But she was not sorry when Madame Cheron, who, though she now tried to appear unconcerned, was really much embarrassed, prepared to withdraw immediately after supper. Montoni then came to hand Madame Cheron to her carriage, and Cavigni, with an arch solemnity of countenance, followed with Emily, who, as she wished them good night and drew up the glass, saw Valancourt among the crowds at the gates. Before the carriage drove off, he disappeared. Madame Cheron forbore to mention him to Emily, and, as soon as they reached the chateau, they separated for the night. On the following morning, as Emily sat at breakfast with her aunt,
A letter was brought to her, of which she knew the handwriting upon the cover, and, as she received it with a trembling hand, Madame Cheron hastily inquired from whom it came. Emily, with her leave, broke the seal, and, observing the signature of Valancourt, gave it unread to her aunt, who received it with impatience, and, as she looked it over, Emily endeavoured to read on her countenance its contents. Having returned the letter to her niece, whose eyes asked if she might examine it,
"Oh, yes, read it, child," said Madame Cheron in a manner less severe than she had expected,
and Emily had, perhaps, never before so willingly obeyed her aunt. In this letter Valancourt said little of the interview of the preceding day, but concluded with declaring that he would accept his dismission from Emily only, and with entreating that she would allow him to wait upon her on the approaching evening. When she read this, she was astonished at the moderation of Madame Cheron, and looked at her with timid expectation, as she said sorrowfully, "What am I to say, madame?"
"Oh, why, we must see the young man, I believe," replied her aunt, "and hear what he has further to say for himself. You may tell him he may come."
Emily dared scarcely credit what she heard.
"Yet, stay," added Madame Cheron, "I will tell him so myself."
She called for pen and ink, Emily still not daring to trust the emotions she felt, and almost sinking beneath them. Her surprise would have been less had she overheard on the preceding evening what Madame Cheron had not forgotten, that Valancourt was the nephew of Madame Clerval. What were the particulars of her aunt's note Emily did not learn, but the result was a visit from Valancourt in the evening, whom Madame Cheron received alone, and they had a long conversation before Emily was called down. When she entered the room, her aunt was conversing with complacency, and she saw the eyes of Valancourt, as he impatiently rose, animated with hope.
"We have been talking over this affair," said Madame Cheron. "The Chevalier has been telling me that the late Monsieur Clerval was the brother of the Countess de Duverny, his mother. Oh, I only wish he had mentioned this relationship to Madame Clerval before. I certainly should have considered that circumstance as a sufficient introduction to my house."
Valancourt bowed, and was going to address Emily, but her aunt prevented him.
"I have, therefore, consented that you shall receive his visits, and though I will not bind myself by any promise, or say that I shall consider him as my nephew, yet I shall permit the intercourse, and shall look forward to any further connection as an event which may possibly take place in a course of years, provided the Chevalier rises in his profession, or any circumstance occurred which may make it prudent for him to take a wife. But Monsieur Valancourt will observe, and you too, Emily, that till that happens, I positively forbid any thoughts of marrying."
Emily's countenance during this coarse speech varied every instant, and towards the conclusion her distress had so much increased that she was on the point of leaving the room. Valancourt, meanwhile, scarcely less embarrassed, did not dare to look at her for whom he was thus distressed, but when Madame Cheron was silent, he said, "Flattery, madame, as your approbation is to me, highly as I am honoured by it, I have yet so much to fear that I scarcely dare to hope."
"Oh, pray, sir, explain yourself," said Madame Cheron,
an unexpected requisition which embarrassed Valancourt again, and almost overcame him with confusion at circumstances on which, had he been only a spectator of the scene, he would have smiled. "Till I receive Mademoiselle St. Aubert's permission to accept your indulgence," said he, falteringly.
till she allows me to ope."
"Oh, is that all?" interrupted Madame Cheron. "Well, I will take it upon me to answer for her, but at the same time, sir, give me leave to observe to you that I am her guardian, and that I expect in every instance that my will is hers."
As she said this, she rose and quitted the room, leaving Emily and Valancourt in a state of mutual embarrassment, and when Valancourt's hopes enabled him to overcome his fears and to address her with the zeal and sincerity so natural to him, it was a considerable time before she was sufficiently recovered to hear with distinctness his solicitations and inquiries. The conduct of Madame Cheron in this affair had been entirely governed by selfish vanity. Valancourt, in his first interview, had with great candour laid open to her the true state of his present circumstances and his future expectancies, and she, with more prudence than humanity, had absolutely and abruptly rejected his suit. She wished her niece to marry ambitiously, not because she desired to see her in possession of the happiness which rank and wealth are usually believed to bestow, but because she desired to partake the importance which such an alliance would give. When, therefore, she discovered that Valancourt was the nephew of a person of so much consequence as Madame Clerval, she became anxious for the connection, since the prospect it afforded of future fortune and distinction for Emily promised the exaltation she coveted for herself. Her calculations concerning fortune in this alliance were guided rather by her wishes than by any hint of Valancourt, or a strong appearance of probability, and when she rested her expectation of the wealth of Madame Clerval, she seemed totally to have forgotten that the latter had a daughter. Valancourt, however, had not forgotten this circumstance, and the consideration of it had made him so modest in his expectations from Madame Clerval, that he had not even named the relationship with his first conversation with Madame Cheron. But whatever might be the future fortune of Emily, the present distinction which the connection would afford for herself was certain, since the splendour of Madame Clerval's establishment was such as to excite the general envy and partial imitation of the neighbourhood. Thus had she consented to involve her niece in an engagement to which she saw only a distant and uncertain conclusion, with as little consideration of her happiness as when she had so precipitately forbade it. For though she herself possessed the means of rendering this union not only certain but prudent, yet to do so was no part of her present intention. From this period Valancourt made frequent visits to Madame Cheron, and Emily passed in his society the happiest hours she had known since the death of her father. They were both too much engaged by the present moments to give serious consideration to the future. They loved and were beloved, and saw not that the very attachment which formed the delight of their present days might possibly occasion the sufferings of years. Meanwhile, Madame Cheron's intercourse with Madame Clerval became more frequent than before, and her vanity was already gratified by the opportunity of proclaiming, wherever she went, the attachment that subsisted between their nephew and niece. Montoni was now also become a daily guest at the chateau, and Emily was compelled to observe that he really was a suitor, and a favoured suitor, to her aunt. Thus passed the winter months, not only in peace, but in happiness, to Valancourt and Emily, the station of his regiment being so near Toulouse as to allow this frequent intercourse. The pavilion on the terrace was their favourite scene of their interviews, and there Emily with Madame Cheron would work, while Valancourt read aloud works of genius and taste, listened to her enthusiasm, expressed his own, and caught new opportunities of observing that their minds were formed to constitute the happiness of each other, the same taste, the same noble and benevolent sentiments animating each. End of chapter 12. Reading and performance of musical selections by Kara Dahl
Russell.